Hello, my name is Richard Haight, and today I'd like to talk to you about spiritual awakening and the knowledge trap. There are a number of common perspectives on spiritual awakening, and there's a polarization between these knowledges. One is the idea of truth, as if there is an ultimate truth that could be known, and that is a knowledge trap. It's very common, it's a religious concept, but it's also found throughout all types of philosophy and New Age spirituality. It's incredibly destructive perspective, and it's based on arrogance, even if we're unaware of it. And the arrogance is born. It's not you that's arrogant, or me that's arrogant. It is arrogance, the spirit of arrogance, that creates this idea that that truth can be known, and that it can be encapsulated by the mind. And so the word truth fundamentally has almost no meaning, no useful meaning anyway. As it applies to that perspective on truth, that it could be known. Because there isn't any fixed point in reality which can be pinned down and that can be used to explain all that is. Now, how does that relate to the individual experience of life? Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, it relates to everything you do. Any knowledge that you know, anything that you know, can never be 100% true. One of my martial arts instructors used to say that I'd asked him how much he knew of his art. You know, how close had he come to full mastery? I mean, beyond the license of full mastery, but I mean, actual perfection. And he said to me that perfection was an illusion, and that he never tries to imagine that he knows 100% or that he's perfect in his technique. Instead, he doesn't allow his mind to stop or to go beyond 97%. He never opines perfection beyond 97%, which is to say, he always assumes there's still a little bit more than he knows. There's still a little bit, that 3% beyond where he's capable of achieving. He's not yet seen. He's not yet experienced. So it keeps him hungry. It keeps him curious. It keeps him growing. And so he never assumes that there's perfection. He never assumes that there's a truth. It's as he described it, the 97% philosophy. And that made a lot of sense to me. And if you think about it, it makes you will find that it's very practical in your life, because as soon as you assume that you know everything, your development, your growth, your search is over. You've put a period on your developmental process, a period on, more importantly, your awareness. A period on awareness. Boxed life in. And this is true of any knowledge that one has. If one tightens down the mind on that knowledge and assuming that we know all it is now encapsulated and is out of context with all that is, which means that we've put a period on our awareness with regard to that knowledge. Another way of looking at it is everything that we know now, we will look back on 100 years from now and say we didn't know much. Just like we look back 100 years to what we knew and we think, we really didn't know much. Or even how ridiculously silly some of our ideas were. Knowledge will always be that way. You will always look back on what you knew previously and think, how silly I was. And unfortunately, this awareness of the limitations of knowledge can actually be out of context or wrongly understood, can be also a limiter to what you're willing to express into the world. For example, you may have knowledge in a certain topic, but you refuse to share it. You may have important knowledge in a certain topic, but you may refuse to share it because you think to yourself, my knowledge isn't perfect. And therefore you're seeking perfection before sharing it, which means that you withhold that knowledge. This was a concern, I suppose, for anybody who had walked the spiritual awareness path in the past, and who may have needed to teach certain things, but they thought, it's an honest perception, I don't know enough to teach. Well, if perfection is the requirement to teach, we would have no teachers. And so there is a point where teaching itself is the learning path. One can only go so far studying from a teacher until one needs to actually become a teacher and teach. Even still, that knowledge is not perfect. Even if the knowledge was perfect, the ability to express it is fundamentally imperfect. Even if the ability to express it was perfect, the receiver will always receive it through an imperfect filter of their lack of awareness. So there's a lot of room for misunderstanding. That's why we need to soften our perspective on knowledge, soften our perspective on truth. Never more than 97%, as my teacher says. I would say it's probably a fairly good way of approaching it, especially early on, 70%. And that leaves that extra 30% leeway for exploration. In the awakening process, the perception of softening will always be helpful. Whenever there's a blockage, whenever there's a hardness, whenever there's the idea that we know something, we soften. This softening. This leads us to the teaching of non-duality. Non-duality is a concept that all knowledge is an illusion, that the self is an illusion, that every thought, every emotion is an illusion, and that there is actually no separation between everything, all that is. Everything is all that is, and that the way we see our bodies as being separate from all that is also an illusion. But in saying that, we've just now made a 100% statement of truth. That truth, all that is, that our perception of all that is false, is an illusion, which is to say, everything that you value in your life, your children, your wife, the love that you have, the relationships that you have, the meaningful things that you do, maybe your career or goals, or everything that you've ever done, everything that you ever do, everything that you ever will do, which are all based on values, your aims. Every value is an aim. Anything that you aim for, you wouldn't aim for it unless you considered it valuable, which means food, water, breathing. It means moving anywhere. There must be a value in order for you to aim towards it and move towards it. This is what the mind does. It aims and moves the body towards values. If there were no values, the body would simply fade away and could not survive. So the non-dualistic perspective ultimately, it inherently views values, even if a person is unaware of this, as being false, as being illusions, which means your love for your wife, your children, it's an illusion. It's a false value. And so what it is actually a kind of condemnation against existence. Truth is non-existence. Truth is beyond all specific form. Again, it takes us back to that whole truth route, which is a trap. But the reality is all that is includes all form. And in the inclusion of all form is also mind. And mind projects duality, which is the projections of opposites, up, down, front, back, high, low, strong, weak, all of that stuff. It's essential for the mind to project those things, me and other, in order for this body to actually function in the world and get from point A to point B without bumping into something, falling into some hole. So our values, the values that we hold, are essential so that the body can actually exist and function in this world. So when the mind assumes or has come to the conclusion that duality is false, that thought, emotion, and all that stuff is just an illusion, and that all that is non-dual, it's a kind of judgment against values, which is a judgment against existence. It leads to a nihilistic perspective that there is no meaning in life. It's inevitable. It will automatically lead towards life is meaningless, and that the goal then is to get beyond the physical, get beyond the body, get beyond the experiences of humanness, towards only the experience of all that is. It neglects the fact that humanness is part of all that is. Emotion and thought is part of all that is. It's not wrong. It serves a necessary purpose. What creates the dysfunction is when the mind clings to thoughts and emotions, when the mind clings to form, or when the mind clings to non-duality, when the mind clings to the theories of all that is, when the mind clings to anything. It doesn't matter if it's dual or non-dual. It creates the same form of suffering. Now, when the mind clings to form, then there's the suffering of desperation to preserve that form. Fear of the unknown, the chaotic, that which threatens the form. When the mind clings to all that is, then there's a judgment against form. A feeling that the human that we experience through is wrong, that this is all an illusion, this is foolishness. We need to get beyond this. That's equally, that produces an equal amount of suffering. It is a disharmony. The essential awareness comes from seeing both simultaneously, the dual and non-dual simultaneously, respecting both, because they both serve an important function. There's a lot more we can go into this concept of dual versus non-dual, but just be aware when you enter into a non-dual perspective, which, for example, meditations may bring one to such perspectives. Psychedelics may bring to one's to such perspectives of non-duality. Near-death experiences can cause the same phenomenon. The perspective of a non-dual perspective, that one is that all is connected, and maybe that the body is an illusion. We will call those peak experiences. And once we have those peak experiences, they become a form of suffering, because our regular experiences then become compared to those peak experiences. And the regular mundane experiences of life, from that perspective, the comparative perspective, can never live up to those peak experiences. And what it creates is this constant judgment of our daily life experiences. It's insufficient. Then daily life becomes a form of suffering, and we just want to get back to those peak experiences. What causes that suffering is, again, the mind clinging to those perspectives. It would be better to say that the universe is made up of perspective, within perspectives, within perspectives, within perspectives, within perspectives ad infinitum. And that each of these perspectives are valuable. By perspectives, I don't mean opinions necessarily. We could include that, but that's not fundamentally what I mean. I mean a direct window into the experiential universe. And when we cling to any one of these perspectives, whether it's the total perspective to the exclusion of the specific perspective, there's an imbalance. When we cling to the specific perspective, which is where most people are, there's suffering, there's imbalance. The awakened individual is open to all of these perspectives, and they come into alignment. So we've got the individual perspective, which is valued, allows for functionality in the world, as well as the perspective of relationships with the family, with friends, as well as the community level interaction and relationship perspective, the maybe country perspective, the global perspective, the earth perspective, the solar system perspective, the universal perspective, the perspective of all that it both is and is beyond being, is not. Because all that is both is and is not simultaneously. When all of these perspectives come into alignment, the human nervous system functions a little bit more a lot more harmoniously. And it creates tremendous functionality in the world, a unification in the body that produces startling results, which I don't really want to get into right now, as it can become a distraction for the path for now. The important thing to understand is we're seeking this unification of perspectives in such a way that our daily life in each moment is lighter and more fulfilling. And in order to do that, we need both the specific perspective and the values, again softened, the softened values of our daily life perspective. For example, the needs for food and water, for affection and love, for interaction, for play, for all of these things. All these are important values. We soften them, 70%. We don't want to cling to any. Sometimes going without food is important. Sometimes going without meditation is important. Many times meditation is important. But meditation isn't the end-all and be-all. There isn't any one thing that is the answer. So you move through your life and you soften. You remove the willfulness. Remaining open, a little bit of that door is open for new exploration, that 30% curiosity, the not knowingness. If you were to ask me what I know, my answer is not very much. And most of what I know is only functional knowledge, which means it's knowledge that allows me to move to the next step along the path. And usually when you get a few steps down the path, you look back on what you thought you knew, and you go, well, that really wasn't very much. And you do that enough times, you realize that maybe any knowledge you have is never really all that much, and never is fully sufficient. So you might ask, well, then why am I sharing that knowledge? It may help somebody. You may find it useful in your life. To withhold that knowledge would be unfortunate. Not everybody has walked the path as far. Some have walked the path further. Who knows? All I know is what I feel is necessary to share with the world. So I share that, knowing that it could be a benefit to some people. In the same way, your awakening path is a service. When you make those internal changes and open up your perspective and start to see the totality and the specific and balance those out, it changes the atmosphere around you, and it allows consciousness to be in the skin and comfortable. A full embracing of life for all it is and all that is specific. Embracing it in the moment and releasing it in the moment. And that is truly inspiring. The benefits of that are manyfold beyond explanation. One of the things that occurs as a result of that is greater insight into what is occurring both within and without around us. And that insight is helpful to the people that are willing to accept it, who are interested in it. So I think that I'm going to wrap this video up. Go ahead and click subscribe at the bottom of this screen, and share with a friend who is interested in spiritual awakening. Tune in for the next video. I'll be putting up videos fairly regularly. If you have any specific questions with regard to anything that I've said, feel free to email me at contact@richardhaight.net, H-A-I-G-H-T, richardhaight.net, H-A-I-G-H-T. If you would like to take part in the public mentoring, which is a conversation between you and I, that would be publicly available on YouTube, it would be on the same channel, so that other people can learn from your personal blockages, so that many people, you will find, many people share common blockages. Almost everybody thinks that they alone feel certain things. After mentoring many people over many years, there's very little that's new under the sun. And your issue, when you get to the heart of it, you may be helping hundreds or thousands or millions of people over the long term to understand the issues that they're experiencing. And so your own process of awakening is a benefit to others. And so if you're interested in that in that sort of exploration, we don't have to say your name, just your personal name, and we can have an enjoyable conversation. Essential points: no politics, no spiritual trivia, only sincere questions related to your personal path of awakening. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.